his eyes slowly rising. Sunrise warms the horizon. Sand dunes form in the distance. He's up and out in an instant. The crowd, they all were waiting, watching and anticipating. A man appears from afar. Could it be the one sent by Allah? He shouts, here comes the prophet. His face is a light that drives out the darkness. Words are alive, his message is living. Joy everywhere, our voices are singing.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to another episode of the Y Factor, listeners. Today is Thursday, the 30th of... I'm stuck.
Seriously? The 30th of May.
And we're here for another live episode. You've got Tasneem here on the mic, joined by...
Miran, apparently the only person who knows the date around here.
No, excuse me. It's been hard, okay, keeping track of this year. It's flown past so quickly. Now, yes, we're here for another live Y Factor episode, and we decided to, I guess, reclaim the show after the boys have been on for a subsequent couple of weeks. Now, a lot has happened, and it's actually, I guess, for me, the dilemma every time we do come into the show again, and we have to go through news. It's like so much has happened. It's like you don't even know what to talk about.
Especially these last 2 weeks, ever since the Woolwich issue happened. I think like there's just been so much in the media, whether it's been produced by Muslim writers or whether it's been produced generally by the media about Muslims. We've definitely been in the spotlight more than usual for the past couple of weeks.
That's right. Now, I guess spotlight, there's good and bad. I guess overwhelmingly it's been pretty kind of negative for the Muslim community. And I think it's kind of the remnants of 9/11, I guess, like it's just that kind of, community under lockdown, the hostilities are rising again, people in fee, it's just...
Yeah, but do you know what's disappointing about that? And I remember reading an article by Mohammed Tawa talking about this, that it's so shocking and disappointing that years on from 9/11 or September 11, our rhetoric about racism, like we haven't learned how to deal with it. They're dealing with it in exactly the same manner that was dealt with at the time. At the time, the excuse was, oh, this is new to us, we don't know what to do. Now there's no excuse. We're still reproducing those same ideas and the same attitudes, and the same kind of heckling is happening to Muslims on the streets. Like the day after the Woolwich attack happened, one of our friends was yelled at as she was getting on a train in Central Station, just racial abuse because she's wearing the hijab.
And a woman did get attacked in Chilora Marketplace. But I guess the issue is, as many commentators did say about 9/11, it wasn't about, although people like to frame it as this is something new, terrorism isn't something that we're kind of used to and things like that. When you actually analyse the racist rhetoric, it was a lot of kind of Orientalist rhetoric, right? So Orientalist rhetoric isn't new. It's not confined to the 21st century. We've had that since, God knows when. So that's why every time, I guess, a calamity like this occurs, and, you have racist diatribes and the usual responses from the society, it's not surprising to see a recurrent trend because they are following that very kind of Orientalist look. And that's not to say, any Muslims kind of agree to what the massacre that happened, or not massacre, that's such a general word, but to the murder and things like that. But then at the same time, it's kind of like...
Why should we all have to get out there and apologise for something?
Exactly, and in Birmingham, 2 weeks before the murder of the soldier, there was a 75-year-old Pakistani man, Muhammad Salim. He was walking home from the mosque, right? He was stabbed in the back 3 times, but by what police actually described as a racially motivated attack. We didn't see him make headlines. We didn't ask any of our British folks to kind of send a press release around. His family's been grieving to this day. We didn't, see any of the people related to the suspect kind of issue press releases and distancing themselves from him. So I guess it's that kind of constant, look, we don't agree with what happened wholeheartedly, but at the same time, why do the Muslim community have to be subject to a collective guilt?
And why does the global Muslim community have to be subject to it? I mean, like, for example, this happened in the UK. And I'm not going to say that they haven't been going through a lot. I mean, 10 mosques and counting have already been attacked, and the English Defence League has... Do you know what? Actually, Channel 10 News referred to them as nationalist extremists this week.
Because
I almost fell over in shock that the word extremist was used against someone other than Muslims.
Yeah, because when the news first came out, right, you had... they were called English activists, right? I'm sorry, but the definition of an activist must be really skewed to describe people who were pelting police. They were rioting, right? Had this been Australia, we know exactly what they were called in our media.
Been there, done that.
Right? So people pelting police, police, rioting against police. You had so many injured police, and these were called as activists. But I guess for me, one of the kind of positive stories that came out of the UK was the Sun actually reported that there were these EDL, and for those who don't know what EDL stands for, it's the English Defence League, and we do have our Australian equivalent, which is the Australian Defence League. They were actually turning up at a protest in, where was it again? They were turning up to a protest in one of the mosques. I just need to find the locality.
Yeah, what'd they do though?
They were turning up to protest and pelt the place, right? But what actually happened is the Muslim leaders inside the mosque actually invited them to come in for a cuppa and a chat. So there was actually 200 people from the local community of all faiths who went to confront 6 EDL members who had come to protest. Then what they basically said is, hey, you know, there's the footies on TV. Yeah. Why don't you guys come in? We'll have a chat about it, and then we'll talk.
I just love that story. I mean, that's what it's all about at the end of the day. It's not about getting it out there and apologising for something that our community didn't really have anything to do with. It's about, first of all, identifying what the root causes are, and second of all, counteracting it with maybe good press, but also with showing people what Islam's really about, what Muslims are really about.
Sorry, that was a York mosque. I didn't have that earlier. It was a York mosque, and it was Imam Abdul Salik.
I just want to go back to something you were saying earlier when you said, like, oh, you know, it didn't start in 9/11. Well, obviously it didn't, but I think the point to raise here is that the idea that terrorism is only a label to be used exclusively for Muslim terrorism, that's when I think that would be the landmark. I mean, I could be wrong, and listeners, feel free to give us a call and let us know if you disagree. But I mean, there was the stuff that was happening in Ireland with the IRA, the Anglicans versus the Protestants, the Catholics versus the Protestants. That was labelled at the time as terrorism. I still remember seeing it on the news, having newsreaders talk about the terrorism in Ireland. And then September 11 happens, and never again do you hear the word terrorism. I mean, the day after, there was something in the news here about a guy in the US, a student who put together a bomb, and he was going to put the explosive in his school. He was going to blow up the school. And to me, that's an act of terror. I mean, I could be wrong, but he had a completely, what was his name? Gary something. It was like a really, really non-Muslim name, if you can put it that way. And that wasn't terrorism. It was not terrorism.
Not just that, but also in America, the week after the horrific kind of the murders and things like that in Boston with the bombs, there was that guy that shot at the Mother's Day protest. Sorry, not the Mother's Day protest, the Mother's Day march. Yeah. He just went in open air shooting. That wasn't branded as terrorism. So I guess the grievance that comes up time and again in the Muslim community is the whole labelling, the collective guilt that's imposed on Muslims, whether they like it or not, and the detrimental effects it has on people in terms of youth being disenfranchised, being angry, and kind of not having creative outlets or even any sort of outlet to take these feelings out.
That actually brings me to a news article that came out today, which, the headline says, Taliban vows revenge after US sergeant on SEAL team shoots dead 9 sleeping Afghan children before burning their bodies in a deadly rampage that killed 16. And then they ask, why does this stuff spill into the Western countries? I think the headline says it all. We don't really need to comment any further on that. But let me take you to a really interesting story that I read today in, where else? The Daily Telegraph. Now,
I feel sorry for your intelligence if that's what you've started reading.
Well, no, I was actually alerted to it by lots of, sarcastic Facebook posts. And then when I did read the article, this is what it says. Basically, the impression you get from reading the article is that anybody who wears Lonsdale is a Muslim troublemaker, extremist, / always in court for something problematic, right? And then they sort of tried to make Lonsdale make a comment about it. Like, they went to them and said, do you have any comments about the fact that these Bankstown Muslim guys are wearing Lonsdale all the time and they're always in trouble? And Lonsdale
refused to comment.
They didn't comment. They didn't say they refused, but I don't think they were able to reach them in time for the article to come out in the wonderful Daily Telegraph. And, what do you think, Tasneem? Like, we've just had comments going back and forth. There were some really amusing comments posted on Facebook saying, ASIO should set up, like a hotline for people to call up every time you see someone wearing Lonsdale. Give us a call and say, crime in action.
Well, it's interesting that, okay, I guess if you ever hang out around these suburbs, it's not rocket science to pick up on a certain trend of people kind of wearing I guess, the attire of a certain, I guess, I'd call them a subculture of people, okay?
Okay, let's just be blatant. We all know when you see someone dressed in Lonsdale and a fake Louis Vuitton bum bag, you just say, that's a Habib. Okay?
Look, I'd rather brand it as a subculture, and if anyone's offended by your comment, Miran, feel free to call us, 9758 3399. 9758 3399 is the live episode, so you can tell us your thoughts. So back to my subculture theory, right? So you've got this subculture, and I think it's interesting that if you kind of analyze subcultures, they all have kind of a look, right? And I guess the subculture for people in these areas is Lonsdale. It's a black and white Adidas, and it's the bum bag. Now, whether or not they're fake, I haven't actually had an investigation myself, but I tend to agree with you.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that people see that as socially acceptable to wear in public and to wear in court. Now, court is different because we all know there's a certain attire that needs to be worn for court. But for someone to write a news article about this, seriously, they must have been having a slow news morning.
Okay, yes, I agree with you. You know why? Because there's been another clothing label that's been under a lot of media scrutiny for the last couple of weeks, and it's Abercrombie and Fitch. And the reason that they've been in the news is because they've been called ageist, sexist, weightist, racist. Basically, they don't have like wheelchair access to their stores. Their sizes do not go above like really, really, really skinny sizes, and it's generally like a very exclusive brand. So there's been a lot of like ire about that, but at least there's a foundation to that story. Whereas I was sitting here reading the article about Lonsdale going, my God, what were they thinking? How did they actually allow this to go to press?
Well, it's a Telegraph, and if you've been following any of their stories, especially in the last week after the incidents in England, you wouldn't be surprised. It's kind of this group attack on what they perceive to be, you know, this Muslim.
Well, it's not surprising coming from the Daily
in the
Telegraph. You know what to expect from most media outlets, you know, which direction they tend to take. But that was just garbage journalism, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, I guess. It's nice to kind of have that lighter news to break things up, but unfortunately it feels like although the last week or so has actually been, the focus has been on England and things like that, it's sad to see that around the world the tensions are still simmering. So in Syria, the tensions are simmering, and it's actually been around 3 years since the revolution first started there.
Has it been that long?
It's been that long, and it's really sad because when you think of the Arab Spring, you think of kind of spontaneous and really quick usurpation of, you know, the dictators, but 3 years is a very, very long time.
I don't think it's even turned out that way for the rest of the Arab Spring countries either, but Syria.
But relatively, 3 years
is
over
into Lebanon now. There were so many attacks in Tripoli last
That's what
week.
I was just going to say. The Bashar al-Assad actually confirmed, this is an article from Haaretz, confirmed that on Hezbollah TV that he's actually received a shipment of S-300 missiles from Russia. Now, it's pretty worrying because there have been these allegations of missiles being coming back and forth through Iran, as we mentioned in an earlier episode, and also through Russia now, and kind of to see where the conflict is actually going to spill into, because it doesn't look like it's going to settle down anytime in Syria, and if it does kind of leak into Lebanon, that will be very, very tragic, especially since there are allegations of chemical weapons and things like that. It might actually border on a full-fledged war, a sectarian war in that region.
Can we not say that it's already a war?
Well, within Syria, definitely, but what I'm talking about is the
like
potential of
borders, you mean?
to actually spill over the borders. Yeah.
And I mean, speaking of conflicts that are ongoing, the Rohingya Muslims are still suffering more than ever. And that event that we spoke about, or the boys spoke about last week, is still on. So if you do want to support their cause, and if you do want to support the Syrian cause, there's so many places where you can, lend your support financially, morally, and whatnot. So look into that, inshallah.
In other news, Bahrain actually reported that what the Interior Minister actually described as a terrorist attack killed at least 2 policemen, and they're in a critical condition.
Who killed policemen?
In Bahrain, we don't know. They haven't laid claim to it, but the Interior Minister has described it as a terrorist attack. It's wounded at least 2. but then the statement actually says 7. So I'm not sure, and it says that it was a homemade device. So
do you know, Bahrain is one of those places that I just never know whether to believe an article or not, because things are just so cloudy there. Like, you never really get a true fact. For every one article, there's an article that counteracts it.
I guess you can't deny that on either side of from the kind of protester side and from the government side, there has been back and forth. So I think that's definitely a situation that can't be denied. Yeah. But in terms of, I guess, has it escalated? Has it kind of went down from earlier months and things like that? It's really hard to be the judge on that because it's such a polarized issue. And depending on what news agency reports, it's actually really hard to kind of get what you'd consider, I guess, quote unquote, the truth in the situation. Yeah. Now, I guess let's just leave it there because we do have some exciting interviews lined up. So do you want to take a short break? Now, when we come back, we're going to be chatting to 2 exciting people. The first is Moby, and we're going to speak to her about the Holy Switch. And if you don't know what that is, don't worry, it's not a bid'ah. We'll explain to you what it is when we come back from our break. And the second amazing person we'll be chatting to today is Yatu, and we'll be speaking to her about Reconciliation Week and Sorry Day. So that's something we're really looking forward to. So we're going to take a short break now. You're listening to The Y Factor on 87.6 FM.
When you're searching for the light and you see no hope inside, be sure and have no doubt, He is always close to you. He's the one who knows you best. He knows what's in your heart. You'll find your peace at last if you just have faith in Him. You're always in my heart and mind. Your name is mentioned every day. I follow you no matter what. My biggest wish is to see you one day. 'Cause I believe, I believe, I believe. Do you believe? Oh, do you believe? 'Cause I believe in a man who used to be so full of love and harmony. He fought for peace and liberty, and never would he hurt anything. He was a mercy for mankind, a teacher till the end of time. No creature could be compared with him, so full of light and blessings. You're always in my heart and mind. Your name is mentioned every day. I'll follow you no matter what. God wills for me one day. 'Cause I believe, I believe, I believe. Do you believe? Oh, do you believe? If you lose your way, believe in a better day.
That was I Believe, the song by Irfan Makki and Maher Zain. Welcome back to the show.
Welcome back to the Y Factor on 87.6 FM, the voice of Islam, the one and only radio station where you get your fix of English language programs with us, Tasneem and Miran, on the mic this week. Now, Tasneem was talking about a program called The Holy Switch just before we went to the break. And just to let you know, we'll give you a little bit of a brief background about what The Holy Switch actually is. It's an ABC program, and what they did was they got several people from different faiths, and they allowed them to switch homes and experience each other's lives for 2 weeks. I think it was 2 weeks, wasn't it, Tasneem? And they had to basically immerse themselves in that other person's life. Now,
because we're so cool and we love our listeners, we thought, you know what, why don't we get one of the stars on the show? So instead of us ranting about what, the Holy Switch was, our thoughts and our ideas about the show, we'll actually get one of the participants to see how it was for her, why she got involved, and anything else. Now, as we mentioned, this is a live program, so you're welcome to actually call in and chat to us. And the number is 97583399. That was 97583399. Now, we've got on the line joining us Mabina Ahmed. Welcome to the show, Mabina.
Assalamualaikum, how are you?
Walaikum assalam. So you're officially a star now. Moby, since the first time I met you, I always knew you had it in you to become super duper famous. But until I saw your face on ABC, I was like, "Ooh, I know that girl."
We should start collecting her autograph.
Oh God, no.
So Moby, the Holy Switch, what made you actually, do you audition for it? Do you send in a request, or how did you actually get involved?
Yeah, the whole process was through an application process. But the producers actually called me personally and wanted me to go on. So they said, submit your application, and I did, and yeah, that's it.
Well, that's great. Now, what was your motivation for actually getting on a program like that?
Why did you apply?
Yep. Well, interfaith is like quite a passion of mine. Being raised in a Christian school sort of really opened my mind into learning more about other faiths, and not only that, but also, seeing what I believe in and how I can reaffirm my own faith. You know what I mean? So I saw that it was, such a great opportunity to, have a great experience, and I went for it.
Moby, I can see exactly why the producers chose your family home for one of the Switch locations, because as I'm watching the episode, your home is literally like, it's part family house, part musalla, part community centre, as they say in the program. It's just like a central hub of activity, mashallah.
Yeah, my family is awesome, and I think that's one of the most
That's pretty modest.
Yeah, yeah, I'm just going to say it. Yeah, they're pretty awesome. Well, I mean, one of the most personal things about the show is that they ask, to bring your family on. So it wasn't just me, it was also my family getting involved, and that was quite a personal step. But alhamdulillah, they just did such a great job. Like, everyone was like asking me, let's meet your parents, I want to meet your parents. So when I told my parents, you've got quite a fan base going, they were like, yeah, that's cool.
How did
we
they
want to meet your
actually
friends.
feel about when you told them, oh, Mum, Dad, I want to do this program? What did they say?
Oh, they support me in pretty much everything I do. So they were like, yep, let's go for it. Come on, have you submitted the application? Hurry up, do it. Yep.
So maybe, I guess, when I first heard about the Holy Switch program, and this was last year before you were actually on, I was like, oh, it'd be really cool to get a Muslim on there, right? But then I was just thinking about logistically how that might work. Obviously, for us, Islam isn't just a faith, it's a complete way of life, and it penetrates all your actions in a day, and it kind of does impose a lot of, I guess, quote unquote restrictions. I mean, we don't see it as restrictions, but society might, right? So how did you actually, did you have concerns before you went on the show, and how did you actually manage to ensure that your being on the show was compliant with your worldview and values and things like that?
Yep, good question. I mean, I had the intention on the show, and I sort of thought to myself, what am I willing to compromise, and what am I willing not to compromise? Like, what am I easy with? And like things like the hijab, or like, obviously I'm not going to take that off, or I'm not going to bow down to another god. So I really thought about what I was willing to do, and so having that sort of thought process allowed me to make a pure intention on what am I doing? Am I doing it for the right reasons? And it is worrying. It is worrying because you're immersing yourself in another faith, and you don't want to do things that conflict with your own religion. And I think that's what I did. And alhamdulillah, there was no problem. Everything went really well. Like, I was able to immerse myself and take time and get that.
I loved seeing your part on the show, Moby. I think you did a fantastic job of representing what it's like to be a Muslim, even though you were in a different household. And one of the reasons for that was because with a lot of the other participants on the show, I felt like, that at some stages they got extremely, extremely uncomfortable because they were just totally out of their comfort zone, and there was nothing about their faith tradition that they really sort of brought with them. Whereas you, for example, on the show were filmed doing your 5 daily prayers, you were wearing hijab at all times. There were some things, and you said it on the program as well, that they're just part of your daily life, and you weren't going to let that go.
Yep.
Did you feel?
Sorry, what was your question?
Did you feel that?
I think that was more of a rant, Moby. She was just supporting your awesomeness.
I'm just being a fangirl. No, but seriously, did you feel that things like salah, the fact that you had to actually consciously make time for that 5 times a day, was that what kept you sane? They
were so accommodating, like when I was like, oh, I've got to pray, so either I pray here or let's go home. They were like, yeah, we can go home. Like, they were really accommodating. They one of the mother that I stayed with, Sue Morgan, she even gave me, because I forgot my prayer mat, she even gave me a mat to pray on. And that was a beautiful sort of extension for her. Like, even though she doesn't pray and, she's not involved in my prayers, but she was so kind enough to give me a mat to pray on. You know what I mean? So little things like that just sort of made the experience so beautiful for me. They let me do whatever I wanted, like it was really easy.
Maybe that was going to be my next question to you. How do you actually feel this program impacted in your life, or I guess what are your reflections on your participation in this program?
Yep, I guess one of my personal reflections is that it kind of, made me realize, how much I love being a Muslim and how Islam really, is important to me. And one way you find that out is by going and experiencing other religions. And it also opened my eyes into, there's a difference between a religion and its followers. And being in the Reformed Jewish community, I learned a lot of things that I didn't know about. It just sort of, gave me the confidence to remember to always be myself and be proud of who I am, as well as always be willing to go out, go somewhere new, go somewhere where it's not in your comfort zone, and hope for the best and see how it goes. Yeah.
Speaking of lack of comfort zones, there was one part shown on the program that you actually had to attend a meeting for a Zionist youth group.
Yeah.
How did you feel going into that?
I actually didn't know there was Zionists. It was just a youth group meeting called Nester, and I didn't know much about it. But they were pretty social. Like, it was more of a social gathering.
Was it at Max Brenner? Because that would have really given you warning signals.
It would have given me a bit of a hint. No, it was at a school, I think it was, in a community room. And they were just young Jewish people. The whole concept of Zionism, we didn't kind of approach that. I didn't know, I didn't feel comfortable talking about Zionism because that wasn't my intention for the show. The show was for interfaith dialogue. And, talking about Zionism with a bunch of kids, I don't think I was well informed enough to be able to engage them in that conversation, so I didn't.
And I like maybe the fact that you actually had very defined goals for yourself before getting on that program, because I think often, when people do get into situations where they're placed outside their comfort zone or they're put in the spotlight, unless you're actually very clear about what you anticipate to get out of it, you can end up somewhere that you really didn't think you would. So it's nice to see that you must have given this a lot of thought before, and you had a lot of kind of goals for yourself. And it's actually really nice to hear. So we're really glad to have you on, Moby. And I guess just to wrap it up, if there were others that kind of were thinking to participate in something like this, maybe not on a ABC TV level, but just kind of little activities that might take them outside their comfort zone, and they're a bit hesitant, what would your words of wisdom be to them?
My words of wisdom would be to anyone, whether they're young or old, no matter what faith you are, go out, go to a church, go to a synagogue, talk to Jews and Christians and Muslims and all types of people, because you can't be afraid of other people just by what they believe in. You've got to push yourself out of your comfort zone. And I mean, for me, it was such a great experience because I was confident with who I am, and that's what I really wish for our Muslim community, that they be confident with who you are enough so that when you are put in a situation where your beliefs are questioned, you're able to respond confidently. That makes any sense. No,
definitely. So it's kind of instill yourself with the values and let it ooze out.
Yes. I mean, one of the things I said on the show is, one way of figuring out what you believe in is go somewhere where no one else believes the same things you do,
and get challenged.
You got to challenge your mind and your brain and your life so that you can reap rewards and benefits. If you can challenge yourself and stay in your comfort zone, then you're not going to learn and you're going to grow. And I grew a lot in this experience, and I made really close friends in Melbourne with the Jewish community.
Well, thank you, Guru Moby. I think you have come out of this all the wiser. So would like to thank the ABC for all their efforts in kind of nurturing you as an individual.
Self-development all the way.
Look, seriously, it's been our pleasure. Thank you so much. And I know you've actually put out some time to speak to us, so we do really highly appreciate it.
Oh, anything for Y Factor. I love guys.
Thank you. We love you too. So thanks, Moby. Have an awesome night. Enjoy the rest of it. And I guess we'll see you in the next gig you've got going, whatever that might be.
Yes, stay tuned.
All right, take care. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum.
Okay, so that was Mabina Ahmed from The Holy Switch, the ABC TV program. Now, I'm pretty sure if anyone's missed it, can they get the podcast online?
Yeah, it's actually on iView on the ABC website. So
Yeah. And I'm pretty sure Mavina is also on our Facebook page. So if
She is,
anyone's
isn't she?
got further questions or queries or things like that they'd like to direct at her, then you can actually get on our Facebook page, which is the Y Factor 87.6 FM. Now we're going to take a short break and come back to you to chat about National Sorry Day and the Reconciliation Week with the awesome Yatu. You're listening to the Y Factor on 87.6 FM.
There's no fear in my heart, got nothing left to lose. I saw my loved ones die. Oh, I swear that I won't give in. By God, you'll never win. I'll fight for what's right. Nothing can stand in my way, even if I get knocked down. I will stand my ground, and I'll never hide or run away. Love will prevail, by God it will. Love will prevail. I refuse to fail. Love will prevail. Life's become so cheap. So many orphans weep, they forgot how to smile. Oh, I cannot understand just how somebody can murder an innocent child. Swear their lives won't be lost in vain, even if I get knocked down. I will stand my ground, and I'll never hide or run away. Love will prevail, by God it will. Love will prevail. I refuse to fail. Love will prevail. God made me free. You can't take that away from me. Freedom is my destiny. I have a dream, and my dream is to see all my people smile, see all them free and proud. I feel the wind of peace, 'cause with hardship comes ease. That's why I won't lose faith, and I know that God is great. So I'll never hide or run away. Love will prevail, by God it will. Love will prevail. I refuse to fail. Love will prevail. I won't run away. Love will prevail.
And that was Meher Zain with Love Will Prevail from his new album. What do
Well,
you think of that song, Tasneem?
I was just going to make a comment on that. I actually like it. It's kind of... I'm not usually into pretty cheesy stuff, but I think that's kind of borderline cheesy.
Well, the video for it is about free Syria. So,
Oh, okay.
I mean, if you look at it from that context, I guess, like, ignore the lyrics for a bit and just think, this is
Yeah,
about Syria.
yeah.
But anyway.
I think it's a themes I guess you pick up in any song, but I don't know. I'm just a bit
Yeah, well, anyway, Matt Zen, Love Will Prevail. If you like the track, buy it off iTunes or Awakening Records. And we're back with the Y Factor, 87.6 FM. It's Tasneem and Miran yet again.
That's right. Now, our next segment is something really, really special. For those who are aware, this week was National Reconciliation Week, which is celebrated across Australia each year between the 27th of May and the 3rd of June. The dates commemorate two significant milestones in the reconciliation journey, and that's the anniversary of the successful 1967 referendum, when finally our Indigenous people were actually given the right to vote. And also the High Court decision of Mabo, which overruled the concept of terra nullius. Now, in other news, it's also the National Sorry Day on May the 26th. So it's a very, very significant, week for Australians generally, and also our Indigenous Australians. Now, to mark this awesome week, we have a pretty amazing person on the phone with us. We have Yatu Hunt, who is a communications consultant and an eco-style writer from Sydney. She's inspired by social justice, environmental issues and fashion writing. She regularly blogs for Peppermint Magazine, US-based conscious culture website Eco Salon, and is a monthly guest on the ABC radio Speaking Out. Welcome to the show, Yatu.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Well, Yatu and I met last week at the I'm Not Racist But event, and I was just sitting there listening to her, and I'm like, oh my God, fangirl moment melting right here. So I thought, she's so awesome. Why don't we actually get her on the show? So I guess, Yatu, what I picked up from the I'm Not Racist But event were things about the Indigenous culture, and also I think for Aboriginal Australians that people don't often speak about. And I guess I just want to start off with my personal takes on that event, and then we can take it from there. So for me, I guess what struck me about what your speech was talking about was the lots of similarities between the experience of Indigenous Australians and that polarization that society puts them in. So you're either kind of an exotic, amazing thing that people want to poke and touch, or you're this troublesome thing that they need to solve. And I guess your speech was about the everyday urban identities that kind of fit in the middle, and you can't actually lump them on either end. So how do you feel as an Indigenous Australian in modern day Australia?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have Aboriginal, British and Irish heritage, and I grew up in, urban Sydney with a really kind of, a different experience to a lot of people. And I think one of the things that we aren't very good at in Australia is acknowledging the evolution of culture and contemporary culture. There's most Aboriginal people these days actually live in urban centres and are actively expressing themselves and engaging with their identity and culture through, dance and graffiti and hip-hop. And Australia's actually recently just announced its very first Indigenous Fashion Week, happening in April 2014. And you're right. I mean, there's either this stagnant romantic notion of what Aboriginal culture is about, that's something that's stuck 40,000 years ago, or it's you put on a current affair and you see pictures of of a minority of people as if they're some kind of representation of the whole. And I think there's a whole group of people, and the majority of people, that we're actually missing in representing modern Aboriginal Australia.
Do you know, something that really struck me when Tasneem actually told me about, this talk that you gave that day, was the fact that in her description of this whole dynamic between the exotic and the urban, and what was the third representation? The troublesome.
Yep.
I felt like I could relate to that on a personal level just from my community background as a Muslim in Australia. And not to liken the two and say that we're exactly the same, but I'm just saying there were some repeat themes there that were resonating with me. And it's interesting to note that there's, it's sort of the same thing, but it's going on throughout Australia, perpetuating different places with different communities.
Absolutely. I think it's true for a lot of communities in Australia. There's and I think the media has a lot to answer for, I guess, in not necessarily representing the diversity and the modernity of a lot of cultures that we celebrate here in Australia. So a lot of us grow up with misconceptions and prejudice that's fueled by the information around us. And it's really sad, because growing up in the Aboriginal community, and I'm sure for a lot of people growing up in their communities as well, your experience is completely different to what you see when you turn on the TV, and you end up kind of, going out and being an advocate, and trying to go, no, it's not like that, and telling people. And I wish there was more room in society where we could showcase that diversity, because we're not, no community is one big homogenous group
that's right.
of people.
Now, Yatu, I guess for Aboriginals specifically, though, the fight for what it means for them has come a long way, but at the same time, I guess we're still stuck in the ice ages in terms of our attitudes towards Indigenous Australians. Now, I do apologise. Earlier, I did say that the 1967 referendum was actually to give them the vote. It wasn't to give them the vote. It was actually to recognise them in the census. Now, I think I was just getting way too ahead of myself, but imagine it took us till 1967 to actually recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in our census. Now, Yatu, for an Indigenous person yourself, how do you feel in terms of kind of this, I guess, the history and the milestones in the reconciliation journey in Australia? What does that mean to you? Do you feel like we've come far? What's ahead? I guess your reflections on the reconciliation journey.
Yeah, I think Australia's come a long way when you think about the fact that a lot of these events have taken place in recent history, in my parents' lifetime, in my grandparents' lifetime. And I think that's something that not a lot of people appreciate, actually just how recent it is. And the theme of this year's Reconciliation Week is Let's Talk Recognition, and there's a whole debate happening at the moment about constitutional recognition. But I think that the things that matter to most people are the everyday interactions. I haven't read the Constitution. Most people I know haven't read the Constitution. And I guess, those steps are really important in terms of us as a country saying these are our values and these are what we commit to. But what matters to most people out in communities all around Australia, is being able to walk down the street and not feel discriminated against, or not, be called racist things. And I think those sort of everyday attitudes, as we've seen this week, a number of really disturbing incidents have happened, particularly in the AFL, that those sort of attitudes still permeate society. And I think for me, that's the most important change that we need to address. On top of all of this, legislative recognition and other things, it's really the education and community awareness that I care about most.
Speaking of community awareness, one big story today was about the Eddie McGuire comments that were put out against Adam Goodes, AFL player, who was in the news last week over the 13-year-old's comments towards him during a game, calling him an ape. Today, it was yesterday actually, Eddie McGuire made a comment that implied that Adam Goodes could be used to promote the musical King Kong, which just had me flinching. I mean, that's just blatantly wrong. And yet he's a big name. He's somebody who has so much media access. How do you feel about the fact that this has happened twice in 1 week and is still actually happening in 2013 Australia?
Yeah, it's really disappointing, particularly because it is Reconciliation Week, and when Adam Goodes was the target of racial abuse. That was actually during an Indigenous round that the AFL were hosting, and I think that's really sad. What I found even more worrying is the media coverage of it. They keep using words like it was a gaffe, it was a miss, it was an error. It was racist. And, it would be nice to see people call it as it is and have those open conversations, and the more kind of sugarcoat it and try to cover it up and talk about it in niceties, I guess the maturity of us as a society, we need to be able to call it as it is and talk about it openly.
I think the sad thing isn't the people that actually sugarcoated it. The people that were using 20s rhetoric to justify it. Some of the tweets under that status, like this is just abhorrent, but one girl was actually saying, "Oh, get over it, we all evolved from apes, just some of us look at more than others." So it was kind of, I guess for me, the sugarcoating is, in society you usually have that when things do erupt. But for me, I was just struck by the disgusting sentiment that you think, what, we're in 2013 and people still think like this.
People were throwing arguments out there like, oh, it's scientifically accurate racism, so you can't call it racism.
I was just like, we're going back to kind of social Darwinism and stuff that's been relegated to the dustbin of history. I don't know. It was pretty mind-boggling, and I felt like, are we really talking about this? But Yatu, just taking you back to something that you did say earlier about the pride in Australian values and things like that, and I think this is something you did touch upon in your talk, was we've recognised that Australians are the Indigenous inhabitants of the land, and it's taken a lot of kind of, a legal I guess, obstacle to get to that point. Why can't we actually start taking pride in the Indigenous culture, in what Indigenous people have to offer, and see that as what makes us Australian, and that's what, you know, kind of gives us those Australian values, rather than this kind of Southern Cross imposed colonial mindset on us. So do you feel like there's almost a dichotomy between what you would hope reconciliation really means and taking pride in Indigenous the reconciliation journey and Indigenous identity versus this this whole we're going to just appease you for, you know, lip service sake, but not really take pride in what Aboriginal means?
Yeah, I find it really strange, because Australia is an extremely unique country in that we have the world's oldest surviving continuous culture, you know, in the entire world. And when you think about that, the mind boggles. And I just don't understand how that isn't a source of national pride, because it's something that we can all own, and it's something that we can all be proud of. And I think, and as I mentioned the other week, you know, when I was 18, a lot of, you know, my friends wanted to, you know, jump off to Europe and see history and culture, and, you know, Australia's a young country, we don't have that here. But, you know, we have rock art in the Kimberley that's almost 60,000 years old, and it's a surviving culture. It's a continuous culture, and I would really love to see those values embedded more in the education system and in our media, so that all Australians, no matter who they are or where they've come from or how long they've been here, can embrace that and really take pride in the fact that, you know, we have this unique thing to share with the rest of the world, and it's something that's really special about us, and it's something that's, you know, should be celebrated in everyday life.
And I think, I guess, a lot of people, you know, themes, Aboriginal culture is all about kind of, you know, kinship and being one with, you know, yourself, your family, the land, things like that, right? And I think they're values that, you know, Australians, migrants, I guess the world would recognise and resonate with.
They're universal.
Why are we stuck on kind of things like, you know, the catch rate mateship and things like that, when we can actually have solid, really rich, beautiful values that people can actually relate to and think, you know what, this is what I want. And you know, for example, the way Aboriginal people, you know, take care of the land and their attitudes towards the land, we can do, you know, a lot, use a lot of that in the way we're treating our environment and things like that. So I guess it's about this whole process of reclaiming those values and putting it out there as a positive thing.
Absolutely, and I think, you know, everyone at the moment is, you know, climate change is a huge issue and sustainability is a huge issue, and I write a lot about, you know, eco-friendly practices in fashion, and you think to yourself, you know, for almost 60,000 years, Aboriginal people have been caring for this land using sustainability practices that are values of their culture. And, you know, how are we not learning from that? How are we not looking to that and thinking, you know, what do we have to embrace from that in order to move forward in the sustainability agenda? It's something that's already been happening. I was in Kakadu a few years ago, and one of the men there said something that really struck me. He said, you know, Aboriginal people have been here for nearly 60,000 years. What's happening now is just a blip on the cultural radar. There's so much to learn, and there's so much richness, and there's just very few places in our modern world where we can actually appreciate that properly.
Yatu, I wanted to ask you about another supposed milestone in this rich history, and that's National Sorry Day, which took place a couple of years ago. Since then, I mean, you've heard maybe people refer to it here and then, but has it really made a big difference? Has it had the impact that at the time it seemed like it would? Because I remember the day it happened, it felt like there was this massive change in Australia. We were full of hope and we'd finally gone a couple of steps forward. Does it feel like that way for the Indigenous Australians as well?
I mean, for me, I was actually in Canberra at the time, and for me it was a pretty big deal, and I think more than anything it was an important symbolic gesture that actually needed to happen for people, and particularly people who were affected by some of the policies, you know, of removing children and all sorts of terrible practices. For many people, I think it was an important symbolic gesture, and it's something that, you know, we can be proud of that it's happened in our lifetime. But as you say, on the ground, when you see and hear these terrible incidents and racist slurs and all sorts of things going on, it does make you wonder how much of an impact it's had on the ground. And I think it just goes to prove the point that there's a lot of things that can happen at the kind of political level and the legal level, but without investing in community education and really supporting our education system to be teaching people these kind of values, there's not going to be a whole lot of action and change on the ground in everyday interaction.
That's so true.
Definitely. Yatu, I think these are, we're both sitting here nodding at everything you're saying. So it's been our pleasure chatting to you, and I really do hope, I guess, the future for our Indigenous Australians is a brighter future, and I hope we can all kind of take part and be proud of, you know, what we have, and I guess all contribute in small ways towards a change. So it's been our pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you for taking the time out to come and join us on the radio today.
Fantastic. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. So that was Yatu, an Indigenous Australian, and we were chatting to her about National Reconciliation Week as well as Sorry Day. And I think these are very, very important questions that we need to think about. I guess sometimes, like, when you're stuck in this Muslim community activism paradigm thing, you often overlook other areas of injustice. And I think Indigenous Australians is definitely something that we often overlook.
And what she was saying about education, I was just thinking the whole way through that like we always, through school, you know, you have a lot of education in the classrooms about Indigenous history, and you know, you often have the guest Indigenous speaker coming to school and whatnot, but there's like a divide there. You finish school and then you go to uni, and if you're lucky enough to study a little bit more about it, you do, but there's no more immersion in it, you know, and there's not, it's like what you guys were saying earlier in the interview about taking on the values as a whole. I think unless you actually adopt it all, take it on, embrace it, and take it on as tightly as, you know, we apparently take on mateship and all of the other values that we always hear. If we don't really do that, then we're not really in touch with the Indigenous culture of the land.
Definitely, and I think you're right. You know, people at school, it's kind of treated as a very very anthropological look at things.
Yeah.
So, you know, this is what they ate, and we look at them as if they're some sort of specimens, right? Then you get to work, and then people complain to you about affirmative action policies and how, you know, Indigenous Australians get that, you know, delegated position, or there's targeted programs and things like that. And that's how your life is. You just see them as a problem. You see them as a policy. You don't see them as a rich, thriving culture. And I think that's what the national conversation needs to change to.
Absolutely.
Why do we have to, and this is just not for Aboriginal people per se, but all minority groups, why do we have to perceive them as either, as we said, an exotic specimen or a problematic bunch that we need to deal with? Why can't we just kind of, you know, when mainstream, or I guess the dominant paradigm is ever reported, they're just seen as, you know what, this is what they've done, and you don't refer to their ethnicity or their background or anything. It's just, you know, the norm. How come we can't offer that same thing to minorities? And I think this resonates with what we were saying earlier in the episode with Muslims or Indigenous people.
But I definitely think that in the sense of minorities, like, it's just like what Yatu was saying earlier. It starts with the community. It starts on a grassroots level. When you start to embrace it and educate yourself and educate those around you, it spreads. And I think as Muslims, we should feel this more than maybe any other minority in Australia, because we go through on a constant level the same amount of bad publicity, the same amount of, you know, sort of that Orientalist thought and whatnot. So, like, we can feel what they are going through in a sense. And if nothing else...
To be fair, we've benefited from the invasion and colonialism. You know, we wouldn't have been here had that not happened. So I guess from a certain perspective, it's not just kind of always throwing it on, quote unquote, the white people and what they did, right? But we're a part of the colonial story. And I think we need to acknowledge that and see what we can do about it. Now, let's just take a really, really quick break, and we'll come back and wrap up the episode. You're listening to The Y Factor on 87.6 FM.
Miles away, oceans apart, never in my sight, but always in my heart. The love is always there, it will never die, only growing stronger, a tear rolls down my eye. I'm thinking of the time the day will come, standing of mine, standing in Iran, making my tawaf, drinking blessings from your well. The challenge of Safa and Marwa rekindles my iman. Oh, oh Allah, I am waiting for the call. I'm praying for the day when I can be near the Kaaba walls. Oh Allah, I am waiting for the call.
And we're back. It's the Y Factor 876 FM with Miran and Tasnim on the Y Factor microphones.
Yep.
The Voice of Islam's microphones. But let's not go into the ownership of that now. Before we wrap up the episode, because we are really tight on time, we're just going to go through 2 events that are happening this week.
Surprise, surprise. The topics are...
Marriage.
Seriously, it baffles me that's... You know, if you can put global issues... In terms of the Muslim community, it seems that's our only problem. But
and
nevertheless...
subhanAllah, every time you put the conversation forward, there's still more to talk about. But anyways, let's just put it out there. The first event is by Al Ghazali Center, and it's called Why Can't We Get Married? Seekers Conversation. That's happening on Saturday, the 1st of June at 6:30 p.m. at the Novotel Olympic Boulevard, Sydney Olympic Park. The cost is entry by donation, and they're going to have a panel discussing the challenges that Muslims face in getting married.
You know what? Seriously, I think marriage is like, you know, those philosophical questions that have been spoken about since eternity, so like the nature of evil and suffering.
Do you know what? I'm pretty sure after these 2 events are over, we're still going to be having more discussions about it. Okay, so next event is by FAMC. They have a marriage workshop. This is a little bit different because this is talking more about going through like how to strengthen your marital connection. So this is for married people, and they've got a presenter who is a principal psychologist and a managing director of her own practice in Melbourne. She's coming down to tell people what not to do and what to do in your marriage. That's going to be also on June the 1st. It's going to be from 8:30 in the morning through to 1 p.m. It is a workshop, and the location is the Regis Hotel on 874 Hume Highway, Bass Hill.
And if you didn't have enough of marriage already, Zainab's blog page has been hitting off the roof because she discusses all things marriage related.
That's the place to go if you really want the information about you know, all the discussions that are happening amongst young Muslims to do with love, relationships in an Islamic paradigm, of course, and marriage.
It's interesting, seriously, it just continues to baffle me, but let's just leave that there. It's been, I think, a good episode. Alhamdulillah, our guests have been pretty awesome. So we'll leave that there. You're welcome to email us, Facebook us, Twitter us, Instagram us, all that stuff.
Network with us, please. Let us know your thoughts about today's episode. If you have any pressing questions or comments, do leave them on any of those social platforms and we'll get right back to you, inshallah. And next week we will be back with another episode, yet another Y Factor program, probably the boys. Right now though, we're going to the next program on the Voice of Islam. Stay tuned, you're listening to 87.6 FM.